SatCon 75 kilowatt inverter, and it was huge, right? It was like the size of a switchgear section, and it was a big deal.
In fact, I think you go back to maybe 2005 or something like that, 2000 to 2005 or even earlier, that maybe half the solar in the country was even in Northern California. They would buy Chinese inverters and take them apart and put them back together, and that would fulfill, assembled in Canada rules.
I was actually going to bring up Antarctica. Like one of my former colleagues there at Aspen Power, Connor English, he and I actually were brainstorming ways to do evacuated tube solar thermal at McMurdo Station in Antarctica.
Really? Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today, our very special guest is somebody that I met a long time ago, and his name is Ben Bachelder. Thanks, Ben, for coming along and saying hi to everybody here on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I kind of remember you back in the days when you were working at the really super cool company, Sunlight and Power, SLP.
Yeah.
And I think if you went back to some of the real early solar companies, they might have been the biggest in the country at some time. I'm not sure, but
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Back when it was in between solar hot water and solar PV.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we did it all.
And I remember one time too, I applied for a job there and I got rejected. It was when I was earlier on in the industry, and I was like, oh, this place is so cool. They would give people credits for riding their bike to work and all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you ride your bike to work when you were there?
I did. Yeah, every day.
All right. So are you in Berkeley?
I'm no longer in Berkeley. I'm down the road in Castro Valley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, couldn't afford a house in Berkeley anymore.
I know, isn't that crazy? The hippie town is now, I don't know what you call that one.
It's now the yuppie town.
Yeah, they got some interesting politics there too. I know they got rid of People's Park and all that kind of stuff.
Well, a lot of changes, that's for sure. That's to be expected.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. And so now what your job title is Multifamily Engineering Manager at Aspen Power.
That's right. Yeah, I've been here for almost a year, and in fact, gotten wrapped into doing our commercial and industrial solar as well. So pretty much anything with a rooftop or a carport, I am in charge of, engineering-wise. Yeah.
Cool. So you say commercial and industrial. That's very nice because most people are just saying C&I, trying to show off and confuse people.
Yeah. I mean, there's enough acronyms out in the world, right, and initials, so try to spell it out.
Okay, great. So how's the C&I business going? Have you been doing C&I most of your career, or? Yeah,
I mean, even at Sunlight and Power, even though I started off with kind of a mix of residential and multifamily C&I, as my career progressed, I kind of found myself both gravitating more towards the larger systems and also being pushed in that way, just because usually when it's a bigger system means more opportunity for revenue, right? And it's better for business. And so working on those projects, I got really good at, and dealing with new construction and coordinating with the different trades that are on the site, and also during the design process, figuring out who's going to put their stuff where and who gets precedence on the roof, those sorts of details that need to get hashed out as early as possible, and oftentimes kind of too late for solar when we get shoved in. I started to excel at, and so that's where I saw myself getting, that's definitely where my strengths were and still are, and I really enjoy that process of coordinating with everybody, whether it's on something that is yet to be built or is already there. Yeah, I really enjoy it.
Cool. I remember that there was a Solar Pro article about a solar installation over at Cliff Bar in Berkeley. Did you work on that one?
I did work on that. Yeah, that was definitely had a good hand in that design. That was fun.
Yeah, and I remember too, when I was teaching some classes in the area, I would take the class to look at different solar installations. And that one was I thought it was super cool and pretty accessible. And so we would drive over there and look at it. I remember doing that a few different times. And then we would read the Solar Pro article about it. And I'm trying to think, I think I had a tour of it maybe too. I think we're going inside. It was pretty neat. I guess it's still probably going strong. Have you heard about that one?
Yeah. No, I've driven by it plenty of times, and you can still hear that old SatCon inverter whirring away.
That's pretty cool. I actually was just listening to a podcast that I did with Mick McDaniel yesterday. You ever run into him?
I have not, no.
Just what made me think of that is he was working for SatCon right when they were switching over to doing solar inverters or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. And so, of course, for people listening, a lot of people don't even know what SatCon is. But if you go back a certain amount of years, I don't know, like 20 years, 15 years, maybe even 10 years ago, they were pretty popular for the bigger, we would call them bigger in those days. Now, maybe they would call them smaller.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it would be like the central inverter where they would use, combiner boxes and bring strings to the combiners and then bring them to the inverters. And then they went out of business. I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right.
I remember too, I was doing stuff up in Canada they had a feed-in tariff, and they were like, do you want the inverter made in China, made in Canada, or made in the US? Like they had all the different options.
Yeah.
And another thing that was kind of funny is they had this thing for domestic content back in the day.
That's right.
And it was like, it had to be made in Canada. And they would buy Chinese inverters and take them apart and put them back together. And that would fulfill, assembled in Canada rules.
Yeah, boy, good thing we don't have to worry about that sort of thing anymore, huh?
Yeah, I know. You could be like, get paid for taking apart a brand new inverter and let somebody else put it together.
Right? Yeah, it's crazy. But it is funny with those SatCons. Like I remember one of our first ones, it was like a SatCon 75 kilowatt inverter, and it was huge, right? It was like the size of a switchgear section, and it was a big deal. Put that sucker in and find room for it. And now, 75 kilowatts, you could just hang on the wall right next to your desk if you wanted.
What is it like? You could take like 3 inverters now that you can hang on the wall, and it's like over a megawatt of PV fits on it.
Right? Yeah.
I think we're approaching maybe an inverter that you could put a megawatt of PV onto it, or
the bigger ones for sure.
Maybe
half. For sure. Even the SMA 125, 150, like that line, you could easily just put that on your desk. It's amazing how far we've come in those electronics.
Yeah, in fact,
bringing the size down.
I think in about 10 days, I'm going to the SNEC conference in China. And so it's the 500,000 people. So that's like a half a mega person, I guess we could say, is going to be at that show. I'm going to go look. I'm going to try to figure out what's the biggest string inverter. And then I'm going to figure out how much PV I can put on it with the PV to inverter ratio, also called the inverter load ratio, and see if we're up to a half a megawatt yet on an inverter. So
right, yeah.
And so these days with C&I, what kind of inverters are you using? Like string inverters, I guess?
Yeah, we're still using string inverters. Primarily, if it's rooftop, then we're going, a lot of times it's SolarEdge is the way we go because of the MLP, like the rapid shutdown requirements that we need to fulfill. And so that's just really the easiest and most cost effective and honestly like tried and true rapid shutdown that there is really.
Less controversial than some of these systems where they're not shutting down the array.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's a big reason why we go with SolarEdge. And for carports, well, sometimes we're still going with SolarEdge on those, but most of the time it's more of an SMA or Chint. CPS is our preferred inverter.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like about those, like they call them UL 3741, like types of rapid shutdown when they're not shutting down the array. But you could have SolarEdge being UL 3741. So it's kind of a little bit misleading. Maybe like an optimizer that takes 2 modules in series, or anybody could go get their microinverter listed for UL 3741, or some of these systems where they'll shut it down every 3 modules. They'll call that like maybe like a mid-circuit interrupter, things like that. But Bill Brooks, put together UL 3741, was sitting on that committee, and he thinks they might even reverse it where you can't do array level shutdown, and maybe even make people go back and change their systems. We'll see. And I know it gets really controversial, but I think like for you using module level shutdown, you're playing it safe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to future-proof things for sure. But also you do bring up a point where I also really want to think about this from the firefighters' perspective, because not only do we have rapid shutdown, right, but there's also fire access pathway requirements that need to be adhered to for rooftops, right? And while there are guidelines for them in the code, it's also up to the fire marshal's discretion, right? And so if it's just a regular wide open roof, right, then it's pretty straightforward. But so many times, especially on these multifamily or even these commercial buildings, there's a lot of equipment on the roof that doesn't make it symmetrical, or it doesn't make it so it's cut and dried as to where these pathways should be, because I think they're supposed to be on the center line axes of the roof. But like if we got a bunch of HVAC that's on the center line, then, how do we want to do it? Like what makes the most sense? And so since I've been doing it for a while, like I have a pretty good idea of what's going to make the firefighters happy and what the fire marshal is going to approve. And so I try to take a look at how they would be moving through that system if there were an event and they were on they didn't want to cut through any potentially live wires, even, with or without rapid shutdown, right? Because that's another thing is we've had these rapid shutdown requirements in place for a fair amount of time now, right? But there are also a lot of, call them legacy systems that are pre-rapid shutdown requirements. And of course, firefighter's not going to know the age of that system, right? And so to play it safe, they're not going to cut through anything. They're not going to assume that the system has been shut down if there is no live wires. And so again, like going back to like thinking about, okay, I want to design this so that there's pathways, so that there's nothing for them, and they don't have to really worry about getting electrocuted. I can take that into consideration when I'm doing these rooftop designs. So yes, there's a shutdown, but that's not the only consideration to make when you're designing a rooftop system.
And so you mentioned legacy systems, and I know you've been working on these systems for quite a while. Are you seeing people taking them apart now, or do you get involved with much of that?
There are some, yeah. Usually it's a remove and replace kind of situation where it makes sense, financial sense for them to go from 230 watt module that was installed 15, 20 years ago to something that's twice as power dense, really. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, I had a friend.
Oh, I was just going to say that's a challenge, yeah.
Yeah. I had a friend call me, and he was asking about, recycling a PV array, and it was PowerGuard. And I bet you probably worked with lots of PowerGuard, I guess. There was the old SunPower.
AKA Flower Garden, yep.
Oh, is that where you got a special name for it? And so maybe we just explain kind of what it was. Do you want to explain what it was?
Sure, yeah. PowerGuard was like a precursor to ballasted systems, really laid flat on the roof, slight tilt usually. And it was made by SunPower, and modules were locked in by this foam blocking, if you want to call it. It was really kind of funky. It was this like framing that went around it.
Tongue and groove foam. Yeah.
Yeah, tongue and groove foam, yeah.
I think it's a building material that sometimes roofers put under the roof or something like that.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, it had a reputation for not draining water away so well. And between that and gathering dust from the air, you'd end up growing moss and other plants on your PV system.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a green roof.
It's a green roof, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool. It was just like a PV module without a frame sticking up on top of a piece of foam, and you would just like set them all down, and then they had like this ballast tray around it where you put ballast blocks to hold it down on the roof. And I think people were also getting like some kind of credit for having the foam insulation because it kept the building at the right temperature.
Yep, cool roof, yeah.
And so I had this friend of mine, Chip, that I used to work with back when I think 2008 or something like that. And he said that he's mostly a roofer, but he does solar also. And he said that there was this system, and I think it was like 600 and something kilowatts of PowerGuard.
Wow, it's big.
That was almost 20. It was like 19 years old. So it was running at the end of the net metering agreement or something like that. And I imagine that if it was probably like $10 a watt. So it was probably like a $6.5 million system, And he said that he called up the recyclers because like they wanted to recycle it, and they were going to charge them $100,000 to come pick it up and take it away. And they also, not just $100,000, but they wanted them to stack it a certain way. Like they weren't going to come up on the roof and take it. And then I saw some people at, what was it? Like, I think it was the NABCEP conference in Reno. And they were giving away like PowerGuard modules. It was just like novelties.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Put that on your desk as a paperweight.
Yeah.
A very large paperweight.
Oh, a lot of people like these old modules and they put them on their walls. Yeah. In fact, I'm making a solar training center right now. If somebody listens really carefully, they'll be able to hear things in the background. And I'm in the commercial kitchen right now. This is where we're not doing construction. Pretty exciting, but also a lot to keep me busy.
Right. But yeah, so you can use some of that for your artwork on the walls, small modules.
Yeah. We're going to take those old modules. I have some Arcos and things like that. And I mean, it's a good deck. I mean, if you're making a solar training center, maybe I could take some of these things and pretty much wallpaper it with old solar modules and stuff.
I bet you could.
I had somebody in one of my heat spring discussion boards this morning, and they were like working at a school, and they were wondering where to get like good deals on modules. And I was like, wow, if you were in California, there's a lot of old ones that people are trying to recycle that I don't know where they were. Yeah. I asked them and I haven't heard back yet. And I was thinking about that too, that back in those days, like 15, 20 years ago, half the solar in the country, maybe even more, was in California. In fact, I think you go back to maybe 2005 or something like that, 2000 to 2005 or even earlier, that maybe half the solar in the country was even in Northern California.
Right, yeah, I bet.
And so we had a talk for NorCal Solar, and Danny Kennedy showed up. And this was like, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago. And he gave a pretty good speech, and he was talking about how NorCal Solar started the solar industry or something like that. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. So in fact, this is going to be the NorCal Solar Training Center where I am sitting right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing that when it's complete for sure.
Yeah, or just let me know when you're in the neighborhood.
Yeah, you're not too far away.
Yeah, a lot of people ride their bikes up these roads. You know, if you're like a super bike rider, Castro Valley isn't that far.
No, people do that loop for sure. Yeah, I would not be surprised. But you brought up a good point about the recycling of modules too. That's something that I've thought about. And I feel like that's one of the things that is definitely another thing worth subsidizing, given the amount of subsidies that are given out, maybe used to be given out for solar. Like that's one piece of it that is often overlooked. Like you said, like $100,000. Like it costs $100,000 to remove and recycle, and like who knows how extensive that recycling will be. But there isn't a good end of life plan for PV modules. And I feel like there needs to be money invested in it to make sure that piece of the puzzle is actually thought through and resolved.
Yeah. And so another thing is kind of speaking about recycling in SunPower, those old SunPower modules had this requirement to be positively grounded.
Right.
And there's somebody that's up in Grass Valley that's selling inverters that work with those modules. So if somebody needs to get introduced, just, find me, look me up. I'll send you her way. So you've been at it for a long time. And I guess you were doing solar thermal too, solar hot water stuff.
I did some. Yeah. I never got super deep into it, but that was one of the things being at Sunlight Power was we did a lot of solar thermal projects, especially here in the Bay Area. And I helped out with the sizing of tanks and get those whole systems together. Yeah, anything from residential, like we did a few small residential ones, but it's mostly because the tax credits could be, if I remember right, the tax credits could be applied to hot water or PV, and the hot water actually worked out better for new construction in order to offset some of the Title 24 requirements. And so that's why solar thermal had a really good run, probably from the early 2000s, up through, I don't know, probably like 10 years ago or so.
Do you see anybody doing thermal anymore? I know that a lot of people just say that PV came down enough in price where you could just heat water with electricity and it doesn't really make sense and it's messier and you have scaling and water and pumps and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's the fact that there's a lot more maintenance that goes with solar hot water versus PV, and just the price of PV has dropped significantly, has made it just much more attractive to go with PV instead of thermal. And I'm not sure exactly how the Title 24 requirements have changed with regard to the amount of credit that you get for PV versus thermal, but that may also have had an impact. But yeah, I don't see much in the way of new solar thermal systems going. And yeah, I'm not even sure. I think, Sunlight Power is still doing them, because I went up to the shop less than a year ago and saw I'm still working on piping setups. So
yeah, I had a guy on the podcast, Michael Shanka, we'll put that in the show notes, not too long ago. And he's like doing solar thermal out in the Midwest somewhere, I think is where he was. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So that's interesting that Sunlight Power is doing it. Or are they doing new systems, do you think? Or
I don't know. I didn't ask.
Because I do get people that ask me about it, and I usually just tell them, go to Sunlight Power, because if anybody's going to do it, they're going to do it,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there's still cool systems that I think will make sense to do thermal as well.
Yeah, I think with the pool systems, the reason that it makes sense is you already have a pool pump there and you're only heating them in the summer. So the delta T isn't that great, the difference in temperature between what the air is and what the pool wants to be. And it wouldn't really work if it was cold outside. So like those.
For like the more inexpensive systems, for sure. Yeah, because if you really want to sink a bunch of money into it, you can go with evacuated tube systems and get real sophisticated and do great when it's super cold out. But
yeah, for the evacuated tubes, you could be doing hot tubs in it. In Antarctica, maybe with those, but for the typical cost-effective solar pool things that are, not in the inside of any kind of insulation or something like that, probably not going to happen.
Right.
But like you're an expert on things like Antarctica.
Well, I was actually going to bring up Antarctica. Like one of my former colleagues there at Aspen Power, Connor English, he and I actually were brainstorming ways to do evacuated tube solar thermal at McMurdo Station in Antarctica.
Really?
Because, that's where I had worked prior to going to Sunline Power and getting into solar at all. Was a utility mechanic, maintenance guy.
Oh, that's so
at
cool.
McMurdo.
I've looked through those job applications so much. Like I've always really wanted to go work in Antarctica, but life has taken me other places.
It's never too late. Never too late.
I know. I'm planning on doing it. I do have a 10-year-old daughter that I can't, disappear for 5 months for. But then I did have somebody else in one of my classes that does some short-term contracts, and he was trying to get me there. But I would just love to go to that planet. Yeah.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it's amazing. Certainly. It's kind of funny how many people that I have met, it's either, oh, wow, that's really cool. How do I do that? I really want to do it. Or you're just crazy.
Yeah.
Who would ever want to subject themselves to that sort of an environment? It's one of the two.
Yeah, I would just super love to do that. And I've talked to some different people that have done it. And I talked to somebody, it was sort of like an interview about doing solar there. And I got to phase 1 or something. And he's just call me next year because none of us are going to leave. We've got people have been there the year before. They're not going to leave, so they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly. It took me 3 years to get a spot.
Oh, yeah. And what was your experience like? I know they don't have the solar thermal hot tub, but otherwise.
No, it was certainly life-changing, amazing. Before I got into solar, before I got into renewables, so I wasn't really looking at it from that angle. But just as a kind of life experience, just absolutely amazing to be in that environment, to meet other people that, from all over the place that had the same sort of adventurous mindset. To be able to kind of explore places that very few people have ever been, and potentially there's one place where I pretty sure, 99.9% sure that I was the first and maybe even still the only person to have ever been because it was such a remote spot in the middle of the continent.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So you would go off on long hikes?
Yeah, I was there with a group setting up a field camp to map the completely ice-covered Gamburtsev mountain range. And so the crew and I went ahead of the scientists to set it up. And on the one day off that we had, I just went for, it was a nice day. And so I just went for a hike. I was pointing myself in one direction. I was I'm just going to walk for an hour as long as I could still see camp and just check it out. And camp was a tiny little dot away and looked around. It was everything else, 360 degrees minus the tiny dot of a camp was just white, white with a blue sky.
All right. So you didn't find any Shackletons out there wandering around lost?
Didn't find any Shackletons, didn't find any aliens or pyramids or wolves.
Or you're not telling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So you were setting up power plants out there? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, well, so in that case, it was just setting up the field camp for the scientists to do their field work. And so my specific role in that specific thing was to set up the furnaces, in each of the tents, make sure that everybody could keep warm. But yeah, like I did everything. Like back at the station, at McMurdo Station, I did everything from changing light bulbs to setting up the furnaces out at the runways. So there were two main runways that were seasonal, and so at the beginning of the season, I go out there and fire them all up, and then do maintenance on the furnaces both out there and around the station. And then just stuff that broke needed to get fixed. That was I was one of the 6 guys that would be called out to fix it.
Like I think they have like a little grid out there, and were you working on that?
So, I mean, I did sort of. I worked at the power plant. I worked changing the air filters, the HVAC. But again, like this is before I was really into power and, like I said, like renewables at all. But when I first went down there, I went down there as a general assistant. So whatever they told me to do, I would. And that was, in that case, I was shoveling out frozen dirt from underneath the water plant where 2 new generators were getting installed. And the water, there had been a water spill, froze the soil. And they needed somebody to operate the handheld jackhammer, get it out. That was my lucky break.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know one guy that got a janitor job there, and he's just like, oh, that was the best thing I ever did,
Yeah, I mean, Antarctica is one of those places where the kind of social order is turned on its head, where you've got, PhDs and lawyers and, like those who are typically like, think of like the elites that are doing the dishwashing jobs and the janitorial jobs because that's how they could get in. And they're getting paid like absolutely like the least out of anybody. And then the blue collar workers, the carpenters, the electricians, they are well paid because they are sought after and they're needed and hard to get. And so they're kind of the top of the pecking order.
Cool.
It's kind of funny to see how that whole dynamic changed.
Yeah, the guy that I knew that was the janitor down there is Scotty Shoemaker, and he was like helping out. He was an employee of NorCal Solar, the nonprofit.
Okay.
I'm going to make it down there someday. I do have a sailboat. If I get desperate.
Oh, that's one way you could brave it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one way to get down there. But yeah, I mean, we had people running shuttles, the shuttle vans that would go from the station to the airfields that were probably half of the crew were retirees. I think somebody, if I remember right, somebody celebrated their 70th birthday while they were down there because that was a great gig to spend half the year down there in our winter, their summer, and then come back and like hang out with the grandkids in the northern summer.
Yeah. So I guess they say that the Antarctica is a desert, or is that more the South Pole?
Yeah. No, the whole continent. Yeah.
The whole continent is a desert. So it's really cold, but there's not a lot of precipitation. And then even if there's 1 inch of snow a year, after 100,000 years, it kind of gets to be deep.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, though, you can get snowstorms, but it's mostly blowing snow.
Yeah.
So those whiteout conditions are nasty, but it's just because it's all blowing around.
And how often is the sky blue and not blue, just like in the summertime down there?
Oh, it's blue 90% of the time.
Oh, so it's just like always blue skies and the sun doesn't set 6 months out of the year.
Yeah, just kind of circles around overhead. Yep.
That's pretty cool.
But it's cool. Like my last season down there, I went down early to help open the station up, and that was still during the spring. And so the sun would set, and you get these sunsets and sunrises that lasted for hours. And just the light was just absolutely amazing. And you get these cool atmospheric effects, like the small cloud that would get these crazy shimmery opalescent looks on them from the amazing. Another world.
Man, I can't wait to get down there. All right. So let's see. So you're mostly designing projects. Have you seen anything unusual or interesting lately, or what's been happening?
Yeah, project-wise, it feels like there's been a shift towards, at least for me, a shift towards larger systems that are going to last for a good, 20 to 30 years, because the way the finances are working is that it needs to work out for the long haul, even more than for a short-term turnaround, because a lot of the incentives are going away. Like, here in California, it's getting harder and harder to make rooftop solar pencil out financially. I think rooftop solar would be pretty much dead if it weren't for at least on a larger scale, if it weren't for the Title 24 requirements that a certain amount of solar be installed.
What do you think about the price of electricity going up? Like that'll save us?
That'll save us. That helps for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's still a good investment, because you can count on the electrical rates continuing to increase. Despite the media blitz from the utilities that's saying that they're doing all they can to keep prices down, and if you actually look at the numbers, they're not.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of incentive to self-generate for sure. Mm-hmm. And of course, as we know with NEM3, the way to make that really work is with storage. But storage isn't cheap. It's getting cheaper. But even then, you can only kind of go up to a certain size economically, or even with physical space. Because if you want to do, let's say, a multifamily housing installation, it's hard to find a place to put those batteries. And it's also hard to find a good way to distribute that stored energy to the tenants. That hasn't really been solved by the industry, nor has it been solved by the utilities. The utilities, not that they have much incentive, but the utilities haven't really given us a good way to do, virtual net metering style arrangement with storage as there is with solar.
So you're doing more of the commercial and industrial, and a lot of people are paying a lot of attention to residential. And then when you say NEM3, I think a lot of people know what that is. They call it net metering 3 in California, where you don't get as much credit for exporting. And they just made a sudden change overnight. And I don't like sudden changes. They should have done it 1% at a time. And so how is it different for commercial? I know with residential versus commercial, at least where we are in the Bay Area, commercial typically has demand charges. So they're charges for power rather than energy. And in addition to the energy charges, of course. And then is the amount that you get for exporting, similar for residential versus commercial and industrial?
The amount is definitely different, but I think you make a good point of, again, going back to storage and demand charges. That's really where storage is going to pay for itself quickly, is to offset those demand charges. So when we're talking big spikes in energy, when certain pieces of equipment are, especially when they're just turned on, and if a battery can take that stored energy that's created from PV and dispatch it to take that spike and cut it off so that it doesn't get above a certain number, that's going to have a very large impact on that demand charge they have to pay to the utility for that momentary use, then that's going to pay for itself, really quickly. And that's probably the biggest change or difference between the commercial or, even really the industrial, because that's more of an industrial thing, even more than commercial, really. That's the biggest push for the economics on solar plus storage versus residential. You're almost never going to have a demand charge in residential.
Yeah, it's actually, my daughter lives in Arizona, and I was kind of surprised. A good percentage of her bill in Scottsdale was demand charges. And I believe that they have residential demand charges in San Diego, something like that. So I think that's a way that the utilities could give the solar people a hard time, because solar doesn't really offset demand charges to any kind of big degree, because kind of what a demand charge is they'll take 15-minute intervals usually, and whatever's the most amount of power that you're using throughout the whole month, that's your demand charge. So all it takes is the sun, one eclipse, you're out of luck.
Yeah. One eclipse or just one cloudy day. And it really makes a big difference.
And I guess when nighttime is sort of an eclipse, because you have the earth between you and the sun. So that's an earth eclipse. I just made it up.
True. Self-eclipsing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But you bring up the point. That's another reason to both have storage, pretty much anywhere that there's demand charges, it's going to make sense to have energy storage, but also energy monitoring to keep an eye on what is being used when and how much. It's changing the way that you use energy to make the most value or cost you the least when it comes to those demand charges.
So are you finding that your job over the years has become a lot more about timing things using software and, measuring and when you're exporting and all that kind of stuff? I mean, it was it used to be just real easy, make this much, you use that much, straight on net metering. And now you have so many variables.
Yeah, it's definitely moving in that direction. It's not 100% where, we need to watch every single 15-minute interval, right? But I think it's more kind of shifting what kind of projects make sense, and even where. more of my projects are now happening in places where they have SRECs, like the renewable energy credits.
So that's on the East Coast.
So it's exported.
Yeah.
Yes, on the East Coast. Yeah, exactly. And some, and also in the Midwest, there's even projects that I have there where it's used not necessarily for on-site generation. It goes back to the utility, and then there are credits that are distributed. And that's how the host makes money, is through those credits. So then that has nothing to do with demand. That has nothing to do with timing. That's just a straight up energy. And it's a lot more simple and straightforward to model, really, because as you're talking about, like, modeling more variables is going to be more complicated, right? And so when you try to factor in demand charges, when you try to factor in time of use and predicting how a person or a company or a building is going to behave, is going to have plenty of variables, plenty of risk, and make it less enticing to investors, to the people who are going to pay for the system. Because a lot of times it's not the building owner that's paying for these systems. It's a third-party entity and doing something like a PPA, a power purchase agreement, where a third party like Aspen Power, where I work, we own most of the systems that we install. The building owner doesn't own it, and the tenants don't own it, but we pay a fee of, a lease basically for the roof. We're looking at a longer financial term of 30, say 30 years, whereas a tenant or even an owner, their timeline is a lot shorter than that most time. So it makes sense for them to just get that income from the lease and not worry about the PV.
So the company that you work for, Aspen Power, they'll design, engineer, install, and own PV projects on multifamily houses and commercial and industrial buildings and things like that.
Yep, and also community solar, which is small ground mount. Yeah, so usually 2 to 5 megawatt ground mount.
And then Aspen is all over the country, all over the U.S. Okay,
all over the U.S. Yeah, based in Manhattan, but we probably half of our workforce is in Manhattan, and the rest are.
So do you get to go to Manhattan for meetings, or just?
I have once. Yeah, I went out there in October. I'll probably go out there again this coming October. And then I travel to project sites, mostly here in California, when it makes sense, either for a site walk to see how the system is going, either right after it's been completed to do a punch list kind of walkthrough, or during construction to check on means and methods, sometimes beforehand to meet with the utility or other interested parties to assess to see if the project even makes sense. There's plenty of times where someone will start getting into a deal, and one of our engineers, including myself, will go take a look and say oh, this switchgear is 50 years old and is rusty and is probably not a good place for us to try and interconnect. Let's factor that into our cost because nobody looked at it yet, and it makes a big difference. It reminds me of when you get these ads on the radio or YouTube or wherever. It's we can give you a solar estimate without even coming to your house. Okay, yeah, good luck with that, because you have no idea what the structure looks like. You have no idea what the electrical looks like. I wouldn't trust that estimate as far as I can throw it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in this industry that need tuning up.
Yeah, they need tuning up, and it's also it's become big enough that there are players that are just trying to make a quick cash grab and without thinking about quality, without thinking about the impact that it's going to have, even immediate impact. They just want to get in, get out, make some money. What's one thing that attracted me to Aspen was the fact that we own the systems for 30 years. And so when we go to design things, we're designing with that long-term,
That's pretty cool.
O&M in mind. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to call Aspen and have them make me some of those 30-year-old PV systems.
Yeah, be happy to. We'll put one on the property for you.
All right, thanks. Great. Let's see. Besides Aspen and all the great work you're doing, is there anything else that you want to cover today?
I'll just say that I feel like I kind of lucked out in the industry that I chose here, in that, when I started off, I got my degree in civil engineering. When I applied to university, and I was accepted in the environmental engineering program at Berkeley, and with the thought of, I'm going to go in and I'm going to build stuff to save the world. And it turned out that the environmental engineering major was really hard and had a lot of chemistry, and I was not very good at chemistry. And so I switched out to civil engineering And it took a while for me to find my real passion. And actually, when I was in Antarctica and thought, well, all right, I think I want to get back into like environmental stuff. And in Antarctica, we were just starting to install 3 wind turbines down there to power the Scott base, New Zealand base there. And I was like, okay, like I think I want to do either solar or wind. I'm going to do engineering for that. And then it was Sunlight Power. Actually, they hired me. Like they were the first place that I applied to when I left Antarctica. They called me in, and I thought I was going to have another like 3 or 4 months of bopping around the country, still living the life of a young and free. But no, they offered me the real job in Berkeley. I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. I guess I'm in solar now. Yeah, it's been great ever since. I can't see myself getting out. No, I love it.
Yeah. I'm not going anywhere either. You're going to be like 120 years old doing the same thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're still going to need us. That's for sure.
It's great crossing paths with you in all these different places, including the Berkeley YMCA. They're like,
yeah, I know. How random was
working
that?
out there like 12 or 15 years ago or something like that. I think maybe.
Yeah. Before
maybe
either of us had kids.
Yeah, I think maybe I saw your Sunlight Power shirt or something like that.
Yep, I think that's what it was.
Can't remember exactly. But yeah, and I'm sure we'll cross our paths many more times. And we could have even crossed paths over at Berkeley. The hardest class I ever took was organic chemistry at UC Berkeley in the Lawrence Science Building. Or I think it was like, wow, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, I knew better than to even get started in the organic chemistry. It was
it was harder than any NABCEP exam. I remember like thinking, I hope I get a D or something like that. And I got a B plus. So they grade hard just to make you work hard. Maybe NABCEP tests do that too. So great.
Yeah, it's true.
All right.
But we made it through.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that we can do this again.
Yeah, me too. This was great. Lots of fun.
Yeah, and thanks for listening to Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to SolarSEAN.com. There's all kinds of classes there, and I can do consulting and teaching, and a lot of times I do teaching and consulting for the same company, like when I went down to Panama. So especially in the winter, call me up so I could do a class in the tropics. Otherwise, let's go to Antarctica with Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Love it.